The Galactic Unity Academy floated in the darkness of space like a silver wheel spinning slowly against the stars. It was built on Helix Prime, a neutral station where no single species held power. Here, young cadets from 12 different worlds came to train together. They learned to fight, to heal, and to work as one force that would protect the galaxy from any threat. Stood at the viewing window of his small quarters and watched a transport ship dock at the station. He was 24 years old, with short brown hair and calm gray eyes that rarely showed worry. Back on Earth, he had spent 3 years teaching wilderness survival in the mountains of Montana. He knew how to start fires with nothing but sticks. He knew how to find water in dry land. He knew how to stay alive when everything around him wanted him dead. Now he was one of only 4 humans at the Academy. Humanity had joined the galactic community just 8 years ago, and they were still seen as newcomers. The other species had traveled between stars for thousands of years. They had built empires and fought wars and made peace long before humans learned to make tools from stone. To them, humans were like children who had just learned to walk. Did not mind being underestimated. He had learned long ago that people who underestimated you often gave you the advantage when it mattered most. The morning bell rang through the station, a soft chime that meant classes would begin soon. Put on his gray cadet uniform and made his way through the curved hallways toward the training section. Other cadets moved around him, and he nodded politely to those who met his eyes. Most did not. They were small and delicate, with hollow bones and feathers that covered their thin arms. They came from a low-gravity world where the sky was always pink and the winds carried them like leaves. They were the opposite, tall and thick with scales that ranged from green to deep brown. They came from a harsh jungle world where only the strong survived. They had bodies like insects, with multiple limbs and eyes that saw in all directions at once. There were others too, species that was still learning to recognize. He entered the classroom for emergency field medicine and found a seat near the middle. The room was shaped like a half circle, with rows of seats rising up from a central floor where the instructor would demonstrate techniques. Large screens on the walls could show diagrams and videos from any world in the Alliance. A cadet sat down beside him. She was smaller than most of her kind, with soft blue feathers and large dark eyes that seemed to hold endless curiosity. Her name was, and she was one of the few aliens who had shown any real interest in talking to humans. "Good morning," she said in her light musical voice. "Did you sleep well?" "Well enough," said with a small smile. "You?" "I dreamed of falling," said. "My people often do. We dream of flying and then suddenly the wind stops and we fall. It is very frightening." "We have similar dreams," said. "Humans dream of falling too. We wake up just before we hit the ground." Tilted her head, a gesture that meant she was thinking. "But humans cannot fly. Why would you dream of falling when you have always been bound to the ground?" Shrugged. "Maybe that is exactly why. We dream of what scares us." Before could respond, a heavy footstep made them both look up. Stood at the end of their row, his yellow eyes fixed on with open contempt. He was one of the largest in the class, with dark green scales and a ridge of small horns running along his skull. His people were warriors who valued strength above all else. "The human and the bird," said with a low rumble in his throat. "The 2 weakest species in the galaxy sitting together. How fitting." "Good morning to you too," said calmly. The snorted. "I do not understand why the Council allowed your kind into this academy. Humans have no history, no wars worth remembering, no great deeds. You come from a small world on the edge of nothing and you think you belong among true warriors." "We have plenty of history," said. "You just have not read it yet." Leaned closer and his breath was hot and smelled of meat. "I have read enough. Your people die from the smallest wounds. Your bones break like dry branches. You cannot survive in cold or heat or thin air. You are soft, human. This academy will prove it." Met this gaze without flinching. "Maybe, or maybe it will prove something else." made a sound that might have been a laugh, and moved away to find his own seat. Let out a breath she had been holding. "He frightens me," she admitted. "They are so aggressive." "He is just testing boundaries," said. "All young males do that, no matter what species they are." The door at the front of the room opened, and instructor entered. She was, with a body covered in dark red shell and 4 arms that moved independently of each other. Her compound eyes swept across the room, seeing every cadet at once. "Today we begin the practical portion of our field medicine training," she announced, her voice clicking slightly on certain sounds. "You have learned the theory. Now you will learn to apply it under realistic conditions." She pressed a button, and the screens showed images of different types of injuries. Broken bones, burns, puncture wounds. Had seen worse in his survival training, but several cadets around him shifted uncomfortably. "We will focus on fractures today," continued. "A broken bone can end a mission if not treated properly. It can end a life if treated incorrectly. You must learn to assess, stabilize, and transport a wounded comrade in the field." She gestured toward a side door. "We will move to the outdoor training area. The terrain there is uneven and difficult. Watch your footing. I do not want any real injuries today." The cadets stood and began filing out of the room, walked beside, who moved carefully on her thin legs. The outdoor area was actually a massive dome built to simulate different environments. Today it was set to rocky terrain, with large boulders and steep slopes covered in loose gravel. Looked out at the challenging landscape and felt something familiar stir in his chest. It looked a little like home. It looked like the mountains where he had spent years teaching people how to survive. He had no way of knowing that in less than an hour, he would need every bit of that training just to keep himself standing. The training dome stretched out before them like a broken land of gray stone and sharp edges. Artificial sunlight poured down from panels hidden in the ceiling far above, casting long shadows between the boulders. The ground was covered in loose rocks that shifted underfoot, and deep gaps opened between larger formations where a careless step could send someone tumbling. Instructor divided the cadets into groups of 5 and assigned each group a path through the terrain. They were supposed to reach a marked checkpoint on the far side while carrying medical supply packs. It was a simple exercise meant to test their ability to move through difficult ground while staying alert. Found himself grouped with, and 2 other cadets. One was a named, whose body was made of a thick gel-like substance that could change shape slightly to move around obstacles. The other was a named, a younger cousin of instructor who rarely spoke but watched everything with intense focus. "I will take the lead," announced as soon as they received their assignment. "The rest of you follow and try not to slow me down." Did not argue. He positioned himself near the back of the group, close to, who was already struggling with the uneven ground. Her hollow bones and light body made her an excellent flyer on her home world, but here she was at a clear disadvantage. They started moving, pushed ahead with confident strides, his heavy body and strong legs handling the rocks with ease, flowed over obstacles in a way that seemed almost lazy, clicked along on multiple legs, finding grip where others would slip, moved carefully, testing each foothold before putting his weight on it. Fell behind almost immediately. Her thin legs were not built for climbing, and she gasped with effort as she tried to keep up, slowed his pace to stay with her. "Take your time," he told her. "There is no prize for finishing first." "We'll say I am proving his point," said between breaths, "that the weak species cannot keep up. Let him say what he wants. Words do not change what is true." They reached a section where 2 large boulders created a gap of about 2 meters. It was not a difficult jump for most species, but for it was a serious obstacle. The others had already crossed and were waiting on the far side, watched with his arms folded across his chest, his expression unreadable. "I can help you across," offered, "if you trust me." Looked at the gap and then at, "What do you want me to do?" "Take my hand. I will brace myself here and swing you across. You just need to hold on and let go when I tell you." She hesitated for only a moment before placing her small, feathered hand in his, planted his feet firmly on a flat rock and gripped her hand tight. He counted to 3 and then swung her forward with all his strength. At the right moment, he released her, and she sailed across the gap with a startled cry. She landed safely on the other side, where steadied her with 2 of her 4 arms. Prepared to jump across himself. He had made hundreds of jumps like this in the mountains. It should have been simple. But the rock under his back foot was not as stable as he thought. As he pushed off, it shifted and rolled away beneath him. His jump turned into a stumble, and instead of sailing across the gap, he fell into it. He dropped about 4 meters before hitting a slope of loose gravel. His body tumbled and rolled, rocks scraping against his uniform and skin. He tried to control his fall, tucking his arms in to protect his head, but his left arm caught on a jagged stone at an awkward angle. He heard the snap before he felt it, a sound like a thick branch breaking. Then the pain arrived, sharp and hot, racing up his arm and into his shoulder. Came to a stop at the bottom of the slope, lying on his back among the scattered rocks. He took a breath and let it out slowly. Then he sat up and looked at his left forearm. It was broken. That much was obvious. The bone had cracked somewhere in the middle, and his arm bent at an angle that nature had never intended. He could see the shape of it pushing against his skin from the inside, though it had not broken through. Above him, he heard screaming. "Are you alive? Someone help him." More voices joined hers. He heard calling for emergency evacuation and clicking rapidly in what might have been her native language. Instructor's sharp commands cut through the noise as she made her way toward the gap. Sat very still and looked at his broken arm. The pain was significant, a deep throbbing ache that pulsed with every heartbeat. But pain was familiar. Pain was just information. It told him that something was wrong, but it did not tell him to stop functioning. He had broken bones before. A finger when he was 12 falling from a tree. 2 ribs when he was 19 during a training accident. A toe just 2 years ago dropped a rock on it while building a shelter. Each time the pain had come and he had kept moving. Instructor appeared at the edge of the gap, looking down at him with all her compound eyes. "Cadet, do not move. I am calling for medical transport." "I can move," said. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "Just give me a minute." "You have a broken limb. You will go into shock. Stay still and wait for help." Looked up at her and then at the faces of his fellow cadets peering down at him. Was crying, her feathers trembling. Stared with wide eyes, looking almost afraid. The others wore expressions of horror and disbelief. Understood. For most species in the galaxy, a broken bone was a crisis. Their bodies were not built to handle such damage while conscious. The pain alone would shut them down, send them into a protective state where they could not think or act. They expected him to collapse at any moment. But was human, and humans were built different. "I appreciate the concern," he said as he slowly got to his feet, cradling his broken arm against his chest. "But I think I can handle this until help arrives. Actually, if someone could throw me down a couple of straight sticks and maybe a belt or strap, I can show you something useful." The aliens stared at him in complete silence. Looked up at their shocked faces, and managed a small smile despite the pain radiating through his arm. "What, did you think this would stop me?" Nobody moved. The alien cadet stood at the edge of the gap and stared down as if he had grown a second head. Instructor's compound eyes were fixed on him, her 4 arms completely still for the first time since had met her. "Cadet," she said slowly, "you are standing with a broken limb." "Yes," agreed. "It hurts quite a bit, but standing is still possible." "That should not be possible." Looked around the bottom of the slope where he had fallen. The pain in his arm was a constant presence now, like a fire burning under his skin. but he had trained himself long ago to acknowledge pain without letting it control him. Pain was a signal, nothing more. It did not get to make decisions. "I could really use those sticks," he called up. "Two straight pieces about the length of my forearm, and something to tie them with." Was the first to move. She looked around frantically and found two pieces of a dead plant that had been placed in the training area for realism. They were dry and straight, exactly what needed. She threw them down carefully and caught them with his good hand. "The strap from my pack," offered, his gel-like body rippling as he removed it. "Will this work?" "Perfect, toss it down." The strap landed near his feet, knelt down slowly and laid out his materials on a flat rock. Then he looked up at the watching faces. "Since we are in a field medicine class," he said, "I might as well make this educational. What I have here is a simple fracture of the radius, which is one of the two bones in my forearm. The bone is broken but has not pierced the skin. That makes this much easier to deal with." "You should not be talking," said. His voice had lost all its earlier aggression. "You should be unconscious. The pain alone should have shut down your nervous system by now." "Human nervous systems work a little differently," explained as he began to position the sticks alongside his broken arm. "We feel the pain, but we can choose how to respond to it. Our ancestors had to keep functioning even when injured because stopping meant death. A broken leg did not pause the winter. A wounded arm did not make the predators go away. We evolved to push through." He took a deep breath and gripped his broken forearm with his good hand. This was the part that would test even his limits. The bone needed to be roughly aligned before he could splint it, or it would heal wrong. "What are you doing?" asked, her voice high with fear. "Setting the bone. It needs to be straight before I immobilize it." "You cannot do that to yourself. The pain will be too much." Looked up at her and smiled. "Watch and learn." He breathed out slowly, emptying his lungs completely. Then he pulled and twisted his forearm in one smooth motion, feeling the broken ends of bone grind against each other as they moved back into alignment. The pain was extraordinary. It hit him like a wave of fire that started in his arm and spread through his entire body. His vision went white at the edges, and for a moment he thought he might actually pass out. But he did not. He held onto consciousness with the same stubborn grip that had carried his species through ice ages and famines and wars. He breathed through the worst of it, in and out, until the wave receded and left only the dull throb behind. "There," he said, his voice slightly strained. "That is the hard part done." Above him made a sound that might have been a prayer in her native language. Instructor had not moved at all. She seemed frozen in place, her compound eyes reflecting image dozens of times. Placed the two sticks on either side of his forearm and began wrapping them with the strap. He worked carefully, making sure the pressure was even and the support was solid. It was not a perfect splint, but it would hold the bone in place until he could get proper medical treatment. "In survival situations," he continued, keeping his voice steady, "you use what you have available. Sticks, belts, torn cloth, even your own shirt if needed. The goal is to immobilize the break so it cannot move and cause more damage. You want it tight enough to hold but not so tight that you cut off blood flow." He tied off the strap and examined his work. The splint was solid. His arm was still a mess of pain, but it was stable now. He would not make the injury worse by moving. "Back home," said as he slowly stood up again, "we have a saying. Pain is weakness leaving the body. I never really agreed with that. Pain is just information. It tells you something is wrong, but it does not get to tell you to give up." "How are you still conscious?" demanded. His voice was almost desperate now. "How are you still talking? I have seen warriors of my own kind fall silent from less severe injuries. The body protects itself by shutting down. It is basic biology." "Human biology is different," said. "We come from what you call a death world. Everything on our planet tried to kill us. The weather, the animals, the diseases, even the plants sometimes. We did not survive by being the strongest or the fastest. We survived by refusing to stop, by getting hurt and keeping going, by breaking and healing and breaking again. He looked up at the slope he had fallen down. It was steep, but there were handholds. He could climb back up with one arm if he was careful. "Cadet, you will wait for medical transport," instructor finally said. Her voice was strange, almost uncertain. "That is an order." "With respect, instructor, I can climb out of here myself. The transport can meet me at the top." He did not wait for permission. He reached up with his good arm, found a grip on a solid rock, and began to pull himself up. His broken arm hung at his side in its makeshift splint, aching with every movement but staying stable. The climb took several minutes. By the time reached the top, he was sweating and breathing hard, but he was standing on level ground with his fellow cadets. The medical transport was just arriving, its lights flashing as it settled onto the rocky terrain. Ran to him, stopping just short of touching him as if afraid she might hurt him further. "That was impossible," she whispered. "What you just did was impossible." Looked at her with tired eyes and shook his head. "No, it was just human." The medical bay of Galactic Unity Academy was a long room filled with equipment that did not recognize. Beds lined the walls, each one designed to adjust its shape for different species. Monitors displayed vital signs in languages he could not read. The air smelled clean and slightly sweet, like the inside of a new machine. Sat on a bed designed for humanoid patients while a doctor examined his arm. The doctor's name was Myra, and her body was a soft blue gel that moved in gentle waves as she worked. She had removed his makeshift splint and was now scanning the break with a handheld device. "The fracture is clean," Myra announced. "No fragments, no damage to the surrounding tissue. Your field treatment was remarkably effective." "Thank you," said. "I have had some practice." Myra paused in her work and looked at him with eyes that floated somewhere inside her transparent form. "I have been studying human biology since your species joined the Alliance. Your pain tolerance readings are unlike anything in my database. Your adrenaline levels, your endorphin production, your ability to maintain cognitive function under extreme stress. It is all far beyond what we considered possible for organic life." "We had to be tough," said simply. "Our world did not give us a choice." The doctor applied a regeneration cast to his arm. It was a flexible sleeve that would accelerate bone healing through some technology did not fully understand. Within a week, his arm would be completely repaired, as if the break had never happened. "You may rest here for a few hours," Myra said. "The initial healing phase requires minimal movement." Nodded and leaned back against the bed. The pain was already fading as the cast did its work, replaced by a warm, tingling sensation. He closed his eyes and let himself relax for the first time since his fall. He did not know how long he slept. When he opened his eyes again, the light in the medical bay had shifted to a softer evening tone, and he was not alone. Sat in a chair beside his bed, her feathers smooth and her dark eyes watching him with concern. When she saw he was awake, she straightened up immediately. "I hope I did not disturb you," she said. "I wanted to make sure you were recovering." "I am fine," assured her. "The cast is working. I barely feel anything now." Was quiet for a moment, her head tilted in that way that meant she was thinking deeply. "I have been reading about your species since we returned from the training ground. I found records that I had dismissed before as exaggeration, stories that seemed too extreme to be true." "What kind of stories?" "A human who cut off his own arm to escape a trap and then walked for days to find help. A human who was lost in frozen wilderness for over a month and survived by eating anything he could find. Humans who continued fighting in wars with injuries that should have killed them instantly. Humans who performed surgery on themselves in remote locations with primitive tools." Nodded slowly. "Those stories are real. My people have always been stubborn about staying alive." But why? Leaned forward, her voice intense with curiosity. The surrender to pain. We let it carry us into sleep where we cannot feel it. Most species do the same. It is the body's way of protecting itself. Why do humans resist? Thought about the question carefully before answering. Because giving up was never an option for us. On Earth, if you gave up, you died. The cold would take you. The predators would find you. The hunger would finish what everything else started. Our ancestors learned that the only way to survive was to keep moving, keep fighting, keep breathing no matter how much it hurt. That lesson got written into our blood. It sounds exhausting, said softly. It is, admitted. But it is also who we are. We feel fear and pain just like anyone else. We just do not let those feelings make our choices for us. They are advisors, not commanders. The door to the medical bay opened and entered. He moved slowly, almost hesitantly, which was strange for his species did not hesitate. They charged forward and dealt with obstacles through force of will. He stopped a few feet from his bed and stood in silence for a long moment. Then, to his surprise, he lowered his head in a formal bow. I offer the debt of apology, said. His voice was rough, as if the words were difficult to speak. I spoke against your kind without understanding. I called you weak when I should have recognized strength in a form I did not expect. Among my people, this is a great shame. Studied this bowed head. He could see that this admission cost something. The pride of his species was legendary, and admitting error went against everything they were raised to value. No apology needed, said. You spoke from what you knew, now you know more. Raised his head, and his yellow eyes held something new. Not friendship exactly, but respect. I have been reading about your world, Earth. It is classified as a Category 4 death world in our databases. Extreme temperature variations, predators in every environment, diseases that adapt to fight against medicines, natural disasters of every kind. And yet your species conquered it all without any of the technologies that other races developed first. We had to work with what we had, said. Sticks and stones and stubbornness. The records say your people fought wars against each other for thousands of years, wars that killed millions, and yet you kept growing, kept building, kept reaching for the stars. Shook his head slowly. My people have always believed that strength comes from the body, from muscle and scale and claw, but watching you today, I begin to think that true strength comes from somewhere else entirely. It comes from here, said, touching his chest over his heart. And here, he touched his temple. The body fails eventually, everyone's does, but the will to continue, the refusal to surrender, that can last forever if you let it. Was quiet again, processing this. Then he nodded once, a sharp gesture of acknowledgement. When you are healed, I would like to hear more about your people's history, the wars you fought, the challenges you overcame. I think there is much my kind could learn from yours. Smiled, I would be happy to share. The turned and left without another word. That was his way. He had said what needed to be said, and now the matter was closed. Watched him go and then looked back at with wonder in her eyes. I have never seen her apologize before. I did not think they knew how. Everyone can learn, said. Even the proud ones, sometimes especially the proud ones. 1 week passed. The regeneration cast had done its work perfectly and his arm was fully healed. He flexed his fingers and rotated his wrist, testing the repaired bone. There was no pain, no stiffness, nothing to show that the limb had ever been broken. Galactic medicine was remarkable. He walked into the emergency field medicine classroom and found it fuller than usual. Not only was his regular class present, but cadets from other sections had crowded in as well. Word had spread through the academy about what had happened in the training dome, and everyone wanted to see the human who had set his own broken bone and climbed out of a ravine with one working arm. Took his usual seat, trying to ignore the stares. Was already there, and she smiled when she saw him. Sat on his other side, a position he had claimed the day before and seemed determined to keep. The three of them had become an unlikely group over the past week, bound together by shared experience. Instructor entered the room, and the noise died down immediately. She moved to the center of the floor and let her compound eyes sweep across the assembled cadets. When her gaze passed over, it lingered for just a moment. "Before we begin today's lesson," she announced, "I have an announcement regarding changes to our curriculum. The Academy Council has approved a new module to be added to the Emergency Field Medicine course. It will focus on human endurance techniques and field treatment methods." A murmur ran through the room, felt his face grow warm as he realized what this meant. "Cadet," continued, "once your medical clearance is complete, you will assist me in teaching certain segments of this module. Your practical demonstration last week has shown that humans possess knowledge worth sharing with the rest of the Alliance." Nodded slowly. "I would be honored, instructor." "Good. Now, let us proceed with today's lesson. We will be covering extreme field scenarios, situations where conventional medical support is unavailable and survival depends entirely on the actions of those present." She activated the wall screens, and images appeared showing various hostile environments. Frozen wastelands, burning deserts, toxic atmospheres, the vacuum of space. Had trained in conditions similar to some of these back on Earth. "In such scenarios," said, "traditional medical protocol often fails. Standard equipment may not be available. Standard procedures may not apply. Those who survive are those who can adapt, improvise, and continue functioning despite conditions that should render them helpless." She turned to look at. "Cadet, would you share some examples from human history that demonstrate these principles?" Stood up, aware of every eye in the room focused on him. He thought about where to begin. There were so many stories he could tell. His people had been surviving against impossible odds for as long as they had existed. "In the early years of human space exploration," he began, "before we had the technologies you take for granted, one of our spacecraft suffered a catastrophic failure on its way to our moon. The crew was stranded in a tiny vessel with failing life support, no heat, and limited power. They were days away from home with no way to call for rescue." The room was completely silent. Even the cadets who had been skeptical of humans leaned forward to listen. "They survived by rationing every resource, by building makeshift repairs from whatever they could find on the ship, and by working together without rest until they found a way home. When they finally landed, they had been awake for almost 4 days straight. They had less than an hour of breathable air remaining, but they survived because they refused to accept that they were going to die." "Were they injured during this ordeal?" one of the cadets asked. "One of them developed a severe infection from the stress and cold. He was delirious with fever for part of the journey, but he kept working, kept contributing, kept fighting to stay alive. His had to force him to rest." Made a sound of approval, a low rumble in his chest that meant respect among his people. "There are countless stories like this in human history," continued. "Mountain climbers who survived for days with broken limbs, waiting for rescue that might never come. Explorers who walked across frozen continents pulling their own supplies because their animals had died. Soldiers who carried wounded friends for miles through hostile territory because leaving them behind was not something they could accept." He paused and looked around the room at the alien faces watching him. Some showed fear, some showed admiration, and some showed something harder to define. A kind of hungry curiosity, as if they wanted to understand how such things were possible. "My people are not the strongest in the galaxy," said. "We are not the fastest or the most advanced, but we have something that has carried us through every challenge we have ever faced. We do not give up. We do not surrender. When everything tells us to stop, to lie down, to accept defeat, we find a way to take one more step, and then another, and another, until either we reach our goal or our bodies finally fail completely." "What makes you that way?" asked. Her voice was soft, almost reverent. "What is it inside humans that refuses to stop?" Considered the question. It was the same question he had asked himself many times over the years. The answer was not simple, but he would try to explain. "I think it is hope," he said finally. "Not foolish hope, not the belief that everything will be fine. Real hope. The knowledge that as long as you are still breathing, still thinking, still trying, there is a chance. Maybe a small chance. Maybe almost no chance at all. But a chance. And humans would rather fight for that tiny possibility than accept certain defeat." Instructor had been listening in silence. Now she moved to stand beside, her multiple eyes reflecting the light from the screens. "I have been an instructor at this academy for 32 cycles," she said. "I have taught cadets from dozens of species. I have seen bravery and skill and determination in many forms, but I have never seen anything quite like what Cadet demonstrated last week. The galaxy's elder races have watched humanity's emergence with interest, and I will admit, with some concern. Now I think I understand why." She turned to face the class directly. "Humans are not dangerous because of their weapons or their ships or their numbers. They are dangerous because they carry something ancient within them, something most species lost long ago when we became comfortable and safe. Humans still remember what it means to fight for survival against a universe that wants them dead, and they have not forgotten how to win that fight." The room remained silent as her words settled over the assembled cadets, looked at his fellow students, at the faces that had once dismissed him as a primitive newcomer. He saw something different in their eyes now. Not fear, not pity, respect, and maybe, just maybe, a desire to learn. A cadet in the back raised her hand. "Cadet, what makes humans keep going when everything says they should stop? When the pain is too much, when the situation is hopeless, when giving up would be so much easier? What is it that pushes you forward?" Thought about his broken arm, about the climb out of the ravine, about all the times in his life when stopping would have been the sensible choice. He thought about his ancestors who had crossed oceans and mountains and frozen wastelands with nothing but their own determination to drive them. Then he shrugged and smiled. "Giving up was never really an option for us. It is just not how we are built." The class ended, but the conversations continued long after. Cadets surrounded with questions about human history, human biology, human psychology. They wanted to know everything, to understand how one species could produce individuals capable of such stubborn, relentless survival. And as answered their questions, as he saw understanding slowly dawn in alien eyes, he realized that this was how bridges were built. Not through treaties or trade agreements, but through moments of shared truth. Through showing others who you really are and letting them see the value in it. Humanity was new to the galaxy. They were still learning, still growing, still finding their place among the stars. But they had something to offer that no other species could match. They had 10,000 years of refusing to die. And that, thought as he walked out of the classroom with on one side and on the other, was worth more than all the technology in the universe.